Good morning. So, today I would usually talk a little bit about jobs I've had or a little bit more fun, lighter topics. But while I was getting ready this morning, I read something that really upset me. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to come and comment very angrily at this or have their own opposing opinions, but it's kind of time I said something about it because it's kind of terrifying, it's kind of emotional, and that's talking about ICE and all of the things that are happening right now. Now, before I get really into this, I want to say, yes, I understand that illegal immigrants, have broken a law, but that doesn't make them any less human. And a lot of them are afraid and are running away from dangers the same way any of us would. They have families and they are being threatened or afraid to die sometimes. Other times they're just looking for better opportunities for their family. That being said, what's happening is not okay. And there's a couple different points I want to hit because of all of the different things that I've read and the arguments I've seen, and it just doesn't make sense anymore to me. So if you want to talk with me about it and share your points of view and why you might feel that way, I am open to speaking with you. If you just want to yell at me and call me names, I don't want any part of that. So, here we go. What I read this morning that really upset me was a school teacher who had shared a story that one of her students was in tears in his class after receiving a text, and she'd asked him to put his phone away. So she pulled him aside and decided to figure out what was going on because this was not a normal response. I don't know anybody who's that attached to their phone for that to be a normal response. But she pulled him aside, and it had turned out that his mother, who was not here legally, had been detained by ICE, and the odds of him seeing her again were very slim. She was being taken to a detention center. And that was very hard to hear, especially after all of the kids who'd been separated from their parents on their first day of school. I don't really remember my first days of school. I remember some fleeting memories, one of them being I was really sad to leave my mom because I'm really attached to her, and so I was crying on my first day of school, but it happens. But I got to go home to her and spend the rest of the evening telling her about school and doing my homework and being with my mom. So for me, the idea that these kids won't have that and have now been terrified to leave or what's going to happen next to them because their parents are gone, because they were taken, that's heartbreaking. That's awful, and that shouldn't be happening, yet somehow it's still happening. And then I made the mistake of scrolling through comments, and one of them that stood out to me that really upset me was when she wrote the story, she didn't call them detention centers. She called them concentration camps. And they came at her for it, and they essentially were very offended that she would dare to compare what is happening to what happened years ago in World War II. Now, I have an issue with that. I understand we're calling them detention centers, and I did my research on this. They called Auschwitz a detention center too. That's what it started off as. People who were political rivals and stood against them were there. People who were Polish after they'd broken away from them were there. And essentially people who they didn't want were there. This was a detention center. That's how it started. So to hear somebody compare these to concentration camps, because that's what they look like right now. Maybe we're not at the end game, we're not gas chambers yet, but that doesn't mean that it's not starting off a lot similarly to what's happened before. So fine, if you don't want to call them concentration camps yet, fine, but at least you have to acknowledge that it's a very dangerous road to start on, one that we've been on before in history. And if you want to look it up, I'm planning to put all of the links of the articles that I read on here. so that you can read for yourself. Auschwitz started off as a detention center for people who they convicted as criminals for whatever reason, people who they didn't like, people who were political rivals, and all of these different groups of people. That's what it began as. And then once they started getting more extreme, as we've started seeing a lot of different extreme views on these things, and Hitler took power and it was getting worse, essentially, they became concentration camps because they were convenient and they already had the people who they didn't want in them. And I know this is really hard to hear, but it's true. And it's terrifying to me that we're doing this, yet we're continuing to scream, well, there's not gas chambers. Well, it's not the end of what Auschwitz was. It might not be what it was in the end, but it looks a lot like what it was in the beginning. And that's really scary. That somehow we haven't learned. Somehow we haven't figured out this isn't good. And there's all of these articles that I didn't look up because I don't have the heart to read them, about what it's like in them. And I've heard and I've read bits and pieces, and it's terrifying and heartbreaking. We're treating people like animals. This isn't okay. They're not most of the people who are in there aren't criminals. They came across the border looking for safety, looking for new hopes, looking for opportunities to help protect their families. Yes, they should have come here legally. Yes, there are things involved to help them get here. But a lot of them are denied, and a lot of them are sent back and end up dying because of this. It's not okay what we're doing. And another thing that I've seen that I also read up on, because it really does upset me when I see these arguments, and one of them was comparing what's happening to what happened in World War II, the concentration camps, the Nazis, everything like that, is an insult to the Holocaust survivors. Did you know that the Holocaust survivors are fighting against ICE? They're sharing their stories, their painful stories to tell, to get them to stop? Yes, I looked that up too, because I'd heard that. And I almost didn't want to believe it was true, because that means that we're not doing really well. If the people who actually lived through this are comparing it to what they went through, this is not okay. We're letting this happen. And I understand, because I remember what it was like when we were in the election process with the current presidents. I remember looking at both, and it was not a good race. I didn't want to vote for either of them. I didn't really like either of them. And if you did like Hillary more than Trump, that's your prerogative. If you like Trump more than Hillary, like I said, that's your prerogative. That's the whole point of being able to vote, is that you're supposed to go and try to help the person that you think would best lead this country. But for some of us, we felt like we were stuck between a rock and a hard place. I didn't feel like either one of them were very good. And I remember most people's argument were, well, he's better than she is, or she's better than he is, or I might not like what he's doing, but he's doing a lot better than her, or I trust him more than I trust her, and vice versa. I don't really like everything she's doing, but she's doing a lot better job than he is, and back and forth and back and forth. And to me, that's not good enough. We shouldn't have ended up in this situation where we were voting for, well, it's not as bad as the other one. That doesn't make it any less bad. And I'm sure some people were fully supportive of either one of them and didn't quite have those arguments, but I heard a lot more of that this last election than I did last time. And it's quite terrifying. And now we're coming up on the next elections. Who's going to be the Democratic Party, who's going to be the Libertarian Party, who's going to be the Republican Party, and all of the other parties that pop up right around this time when everybody starts running again. And I'm scared, because I don't know what's coming next. And I remember reading all about what happened in World War II and thinking that was terrifying. There were families who were Jewish who were good people. They owned businesses. They paid their taxes. They were good people. But simply because they were Jewish, simply because they had differing political opinions, simply because they were born in the wrong place, they were thrown into these terrible places and experienced horrors that most of us can't even imagine. That's happening right now for people who are immigrants, children of immigrants. And part of it isn't the ICE, part of it is these neo-Nazis, that somehow adding neo in front of them is making them better than the original Nazis, who are arguing that they're better than us because their skin is different, who are arguing against us, who are hurting us, who are quite terrifying. I'm Hispanic, if you couldn't tell. And the idea that I could be targeted just because I look different than they do is scary. And it's something that I never thought that I would go through. Yes, I still live in predominantly Hispanic areas. San Antonio is known for having a really big Hispanic population. The Rio Grande Valley is known for being a very highly concentrated Hispanic area. And these are the places that I'm from. But my husband has talked about wanting to look for a new job every now and then. We all do it whenever something gets hard or one coworker says something they aren't supposed to. We're like, yep, that's it, we're quitting, we're leaving. And you go and you look for better opportunities. Or if you want to advance in your workplace, you look at what their requirements are. And he's got opportunities that if he wants to work towards them, it might take him out of the state. And that should be really exciting for us. Even if they'll never happen, thinking about growth and change and moving and exploring should be an exciting thing to talk about. But I'm scared because I feel safe right now where I'm at. And that shouldn't have anything to do with it. Because it shouldn't make a difference where I'm at, but it does. Because if I move somewhere where I become an actual minority, I'm scared of what's going to happen. And maybe they won't know. Maybe they'll just assume that I have a really nice tan because I married somebody with a non-Hispanic last name and I took his name. You hear my name, you can't tell where I'm from. And maybe if I behave differently or I hide it, you wouldn't know. But I shouldn't have to. I was born here. I was raised here. But because I look different from somebody else, people are going to act like I'm worth less, that I deserve less. And that's not okay. And it's never been okay. Our world fought because it wasn't okay. Because what the extremes that people went to during this time were not okay. And we've gone through this before. We had Japanese Americans who were put into detention centers here because we were in a war against Japan and we were afraid that they were gonna rise up and fight against us because they were already here. And that was not okay then. And what we're doing now is not okay. There are humane ways to deal with this. There are better ways to go about this. But sending babies, and I mean babies, 1 and 2 year olds who are barely learning to talk, into court to defend themselves, to explain why they deserve to be here, without a parent, without an attorney, it's not okay. How can we even expect for that to work? How can we defend that that's okay? And this is really hard to talk about because this is one of those subjects that you can ignore it for so long if you don't talk about it, if you don't acknowledge it. But there's only so much we can do now. There was a shooting in El Paso by somebody who assumed that we were invading their lands. even though a lot of us were born here. Somebody who assumed that we didn't have a right to be here. And then there were threats in Harlingen, in Weslaco. And that's a little too close to home for me to ignore anymore. And it's time to talk about it, even if it's going to make it feel more real, even if it's going to make it hurt, even if it makes it hard to sleep at night sometimes. It's time to talk about it. Because it's not okay and we need to do something about it. We need to try to make this better. And it's a hard thing to look up, to read about, to learn about. Because part of it is going to be looking at history and how things start. People keep saying things like, don't compare it to what happened in the Holocaust, because it's not that bad. I will say right now, it doesn't look like it's that bad. It's not, we don't have gas chambers, we're not exterminating people, we're not killing people. There is no world war going on right now. But that's not how it started, is it? That wasn't the beginning, that was the end. And I don't want it to get there. I don't want to be afraid to have kids because of what's happening. I don't want to feel like I have to leave the country to be safe. I don't want to have to worry about hiding who I am. I don't want to dye my hair. I don't want to wear contact. I don't want to hide, which is what a lot of people did at this time. I just read that a father changed the year that his son was born to make him appear older so he wouldn't immediately be sent to a gas chamber. That's not something that I ever want to worry about. That's not something that I ever want my family to worry about. But we're getting there if we let it keep going. And I've read all of these things that were people who argue against it, people who argue for it. And some of the scary things I read are not all the Nazis believed what they were doing. Some of them were just doing their jobs. But we still look back and call them Nazis, and we still look back and shame their actions because they should have known better. They should have known what they were doing was wrong, but they did it anyway, even if they were just doing their job. I know this is a really heavy topic on a Friday, but it's something to think about, something to see, hopefully open your eyes. I don't want us to get there. I want to look back at this video years from now and say, yeah, no, that was obviously very extreme. Obviously, we were never going to be there because we didn't get there. I don't want to look back on this video and say I was right, that it was getting worse, that everyone who was saying it was right, and we got there. Hopefully, this will help kind of get you thinking and get you to the polls and get you to wherever you need to be to make a difference. Thanks for listening.